Hello, everyone. The book of Samuel is a very, very old book. And as a church right now in the month of November, we're studying this book that is like telling a story 3,000 years ago from us. I really believe, even if it's a very old book, this book talks about things that is very relevant and powerful for us today. My goal is to bring this era of kingship to us in our reality today. Clearly, for me, in the book of First Samuel, we see a foreshadow of Jesus, the last king. And we saw last week the contrast between the first king Saul with the last king Jesus. So it's a foreshadow of Jesus' kingship in this world and his kingdom, of course, a kingdom that is spiritual and eternal, like indestructible. The book of Samuel opens with a very interesting mother-son relationship, Hannah and Samuel. As I mentioned a couple weeks ago, for me, this is kind of a foreshadow of the gospel of the New Testament with Mary and her son Jesus. Both stories, like Mary and Jesus, just like Hannah and Samuel, were very, very humble people used by God because of their devotion and their prayer life. And He used them to accomplish unbelievable things. We talked in the first part of a message on Samuel how God is speaking to us. And I share that God is speaking all the time. But how many of us aren't listening because it doesn't sound the way we want it to be? This is the reality. God is speaking to us, but are we bothered or turn off when God doesn't speak or say the things that we want to hear? And at the end of the day, if we want to hear God's voice, be able to learn to listen to God's voice, we need, first of all, to expect to hear God's voice. If we don't expect, God will never be able to reveal ourselves to us. And after that, we need to ask ourselves the question, how does God speak to us? There are many ways that God is speaking to us, but maybe more importantly, are you willing to be patient enough to hear God's true answers in your life? So, as we saw and heard before, Samuel was an amazing man of prayers. There's so many things we can learn from Samuel in regards of prayer life. Well, I introduced when I was talking about Samuel about 3 points. The first one was learning to listen to God. Today, I would like to show you other points about what we can learn from Samuel's prayer life. We'll check a little bit later that prayer puts our security on God. But before, let's start with this point now. Prayer wins battles against sin. So that's another lesson that we need to learn from Samuel is prayer wins battles against sin. So chapter 7, Samuel is a grown-up man. He's a leader in the height of his career. And just before he appointed the first king, Saul. So that was the context. Back then, we know that Israel were a collective of 12 tribes, and they were all operating as independent state. And Samuel was playing the role of a leader, what we call judge, like a judge. And at that time, Israel was fighting against their common enemy, the Philistines. And that's what we're going to read the story. This is where when we read the book of Samuel, we can have a hard time to connect and relate, because it's like we don't have the same system. We're not fighting. We're not in wars, etc. But just want to remind you that we are fighting enemies too. But our enemies are spiritual today, in our context anyway. And I think we can learn from these passages, and we'll learn today that in order to defeat our enemies, we need to rely on prayers, to rely on a lot of prayers. So as I'm reading the next passage in chapter 7, I want you in your head, and I will help you to go through this, to change the word, replace the word Philistines by Satan or demons or sin's temptation. If you replace the word Philistines by Satan, it will change the way you're reading it. Or replace the word Israel by church, or fill your name. And Samuel can be replaced easily by Jesus. If you read the same passage and you replace these three words with what I suggested you, the passage will be totally different. This passage we're going to read in chapter 7 reminds me of Jesus when he was fighting Satan in the desert during the 40 days of prayer and fasting. Or when Jesus, just before got arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, when he was fighting against the temptation and now wanted to drink the cup of suffering and all this, it's kind of the same context. Jesus is wrestling with Satan. He's wrestling against sin's temptation. And Jesus is a great model to learn from and imitate, just in the same way Samuel was a great model worthy of imitation. So let me show you in 1 Samuel chapter 7. Let's start reading in verse 3 here. Then Samuel said to all the people of Israel, if you want to return to the Lord with all your hearts, get rid of all your foreign gods and your images of Ashtoreth. Turn your hearts to the Lord and obey him alone. Then he will rescue you from the Philistines. This is the context of the story, right? Here Samuel, as a leader, is calling people to turn their heart to God. Let's read this passage, this verse again, replacing the word. Then Jesus said to all of his follower, all his disciple, if you want to return to the Lord with all your heart, get rid of these foreign gods, of these idols. Turn your hearts to the Lord and obey him alone. Then he will rescue you from Satan and sin's temptation. You see, when you're reading and changing just these words, you can see the connection between the Old Testament and the New Testament. You can see that these very old stories written 3,000 years ago are still appealing to us, right? Let's keep reading and let's go a little bit further in the story. Verse 7 to 10. When the Philistines rulers heard that Israel had gathered at Mizpah, they mobilized their army in advance. The Israelites were badly frightened when they learned that the Philistines were approaching. Don't stop pleading with the Lord our God to save us from the Philistines, they begged Samuel. So Samuel took a young lamb and offered it to the Lord as a whole burnt offering. He pleaded with the Lord to help Israel, and the Lord answered him. Just as Samuel was sacrificing the burnt offering, the Philistines arrived to attack Israel. But the Lord spoke with a mighty voice of thunder from heaven that day, and the Philistines were thrown into such confusion that the Israelites defeated them. So you see here in the story, as we read, it's through prayer that they were able to defeat their enemy. But you can replace, as I said, these words, and we can see ourselves in the same context, the same story. And finally, let's read in verse 13. So the Philistines were subdued and didn't invade Israel again for some time. And throughout Samuel's lifetime, the Lord's powerful hand was raised against the Philistines. So let's start again, verse 13, but let's read it in the context of, as I was saying, in the context of the New Testament for us. So Satan and his allies were subdued and didn't invade the church again for some time. And throughout Jesus' lifetime, the Lord's powerful hand was raised against the enemy. So what is the point with the story we just read? Very simple. You can't defeat sin. You can't defeat Satan on your own. Jesus showed this to his own disciple, right? We need God. And for us, Christian today, we need Jesus. We need the Lord. And we need the church prayers in order to defeat our enemy, in order to defeat sin and sin temptation in our life. Just the same way that in the story, very old story we read in 1 Samuel chapter 7, God's people needed Samuel's prayers in order to defeat the enemy. Now, I don't know if you remember a few weeks ago when we showed a clip of the Bible Project. In this time, God's people, Israel, had the Ark of God, the Ark of Covenant, right? And they showed it, and they were so proud, just like a trophy. But as God made it very clear, the Ark of Covenant is not Israel's trophy to display in front of other nation in a pride and arrogant way. And we saw that the key was to remain humble, obedient to God, and devoted to prayer, just in the same way for us in our context. Hopefully we learned some lesson in the past and we're not doing the same thing, right? But I remember a few years ago when I was a young Christian, our church, we tend to have a lot of pride and arrogance in some of the things, like our Bible knowledge, for instance. We value our Bible knowledge so much, or our conviction on baptism and practice. And even the church, we elevated the church and church leaders to a place was not healthy at time. And God humbled us to show us that these things are not a trophy. It's not a trophy to put forward before an enemy in a prideful and arrogant way. We need to remain humble and obedient, and follow God's from the heart if we want to experience God's blessing. 2-3 weeks ago, there's a group of people. They started an initiative in Canada. They started to organize a prayer chain, and up to 200 people from coast to coast started for a full day to relay each other and go on their knees and go outside and go pray. For me, I was like stunned and so encouraged by this, because for me, I was like, what a powerful and significant thing to do. And hopefully we'll continue to do this more and more. Before I move on to the next point, I would say this. When you pray, God listens. When you listen, God talks. And when you believe, God works. Isn't that amazing? This is how God works. You know, when you pray, God listens. He's always listening. So let's keep praying. But also, we need also to stop sometime talking, and we need to focus on listening in order for God to talk to us. And at the end of the day, we need to believe. We need to believe in having faith in order for God to work powerfully. Let's move on to the next and last point here. Prayer puts our security on God. Prayers put our security on God. So to close up today, we'll go and explore a passage a little bit further in the book of Samuel, chapter 12. And at this point, Samuel, who was a judge at first, transitioned into his role of prophet because the people wanted a king, which despite he begged the people to not go into that path, both Samuel and God, they said, okay, this is what you want, this is what you're going to get. So he transitioned from his role of judge to more a role of prophet. And here in chapter 12, he's at the end of his life. He has gray hair. He's very old. And it's his, chapter 12, it's his farewell speech to the people. A little bit like Moses with the book of Deuteronomy, if you remember correctly. So it's a very good and great chapter. And Samuel is reminding them that it was not God's will, it was the people's will. He reminded them that he always served since he was a little boy, all his life, God faithfully. He never cheated on God, on people. He was always full of integrity. But at the end, he had a very direct message to deliver to his people at the end of his life. Basically, they were seeking the security on a king, on a position, on this idea that other nation adopted. And he said that was a bad choice, a bad mistake. When we seek, this is the problem, when we seek our security from things of this world, right? False God, idols, or here in the time of Samuel, like this idea of having a powerful king that will bring us security. Instead of seeking security from God, this is where the problems start to happen. And they started to go sideways, and they started to have a lot of problems. And there you go. In his farewell speech, Samuel is reminding them that God didn't cause this. Like, you created the problem basically because you didn't trust God enough, didn't put your security on God, but you rely on your own thinking, your own understanding, and imitated things of this world. So what Samuel will do, pretty amazing in chapter 12, he's like talking to his people he loved dearly, like God will do something today. And I'm going to ask God to do something today to show you that it was a bad idea to not trust God and have this king. He said, you know the season we're in right now was the harvest of wheat. And usually there's no rain. It was a pretty dry season at that time. He said, I'll ask God to bring rain and thunder to show you that how much you were foolish and your idea was really wrong. God sent thunderstorms on a clear day in a season where there's no thunderstorm. Even if it was not a season, as I said. Why? Because this is the way that God can seek our attention and bring us back to Him. This is what Samuel will focus on in his last time with the people. And the people will respond very well to the thunderstorm, just like us today, you know. People respond to thunderstorm. They bring us a sobering mindset, a repenting attitude, and we ask help to God when God allowed thunderstorm in our life. Let's read chapter 12, verse 18 to 24. Then Samuel called on the Lord, and that same day the Lord sent thunder and rain. So all the people stood in awe of the Lord and of Samuel. The people all said to Samuel, pray the Lord of your God for your servants, so that we will not die. For we have added to all our other sins the evil of asking for a king. Do not be afraid, Samuel replied. You have done all this evil, yet do not turn away from the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart. Do not turn away after useless idols. They can do you no good, nor they can rescue you, because they are useless. For the sake of his great name, the Lord will not reject his people, because the Lord was pleased to make you his own. As for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by failing to pray for you. And I will teach you the way that is good and right. But be sure to fear the Lord and serve him faithfully with all your heart. Consider what great things he has done for you. This is an amazing, remarkable passage reminding us the faithfulness of God towards his people. They realize after they saw this miraculous sign of thunder and rain that God was reaching out to his people, and they responded the correct way. When they begged Samuel to pray for them, to intercede for them, I love his answer so much. And it's probably one of very important passage in the book of Samuel, certainly for us today in verse 23, when Samuel is saying, "Far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by failing to pray for you." What a great response from Samuel here, right? Today is up to us to do the same. Jesus is playing the same role as Samuel did at that time. He's playing that same role for us today, and he taught his disciple, and he's teaching us to do the same today. We are royal priests. We are royal priests. This is what the Bible is saying, and priests are praying for the people, are praying for one another. We are sons and daughters of God, and we're called to imitate the example of Jesus in the same way we're called to imitate the example of Samuel. Amen? Prayer is not just a good idea. It's not just optional. It is commanded. It's required. It's all over the Bible, and we just need to take this seriously. I will leave you with these questions today to meditate and put in practice. Has God sent you thunderstorms on clear days? You know, sometimes we don't expect it, and God sent thunderstorms. What has God been doing in your life to show you that He is the only reliable source of security? I hope it was helpful today. Let's have a great appreciation for time of rain and thunderstorm spiritually in our life, and to be reminded that God is doing this to help us to come closer to Him. Have a great week, everyone, and enjoy reading the book of Samuel.